This video will detail Azure NetApp Files volume throughput limit reached metric. The metric displays a Boolean value 0 or 1 on a 5-minute interval cadence. If the volume in question has reached its allocated throughput limit at any point within the 5-minute interval, the value will be a 1. Your volume will experience additional latency if it is reaching its throughput limit. It is important to understand that if you are aligning the throughput limit reached metric with the volume's total throughput metric, the total throughput metric is an average throughput over a 5-minute intervals. For example, let's say you have a volume with 50 megabytes per second of allocated throughput. If at any time during the 5-minute window your application demanded 50 megabytes per second of throughput, the throughput limit reached metric will output the Boolean value of 1, but the total throughput metric will be the average throughput of that 5-minute interval. Latency on the volume will increase due to the volume reaching its throughput limit. It is important to understand that if your volume reaches its throughput limit, then your volume will experience additional latency. Reaching the volume's throughput limit can negatively impact your application performance. Your application's performance may or may not be affected by the volume reaching the throughput limit. It is recommended that you execute one or both of the steps below, either to reduce latency in order to improve application performance and/or return the total throughput metric back to the Boolean value of 0. First, you can allocate more throughput to the volume by increasing the volume size. Latency caused by throughput limit being throttled will decrease after the volume is resized appropriately. Lastly, you can change your volume's capacity pool to a higher tier. If you are using the highest tier, which is Ultra, skip this step. For more information, click the link in the description. First, I will talk about how to navigate to the throughput limit reached metric in the Azure portal and how you can manage the metric. If you go to the Azure portal and navigate to your volume, you can see here that you will land on the volume's overview page. On the left-hand pane towards the bottom you will see the monitoring section. Click Metrics. Notice that scope and metric namespace will automatically populate data based on your volume's resources. Now we must use the drop-down menu to select the throughput limit reached metric. Aggregation by default is set to average and cannot be changed. Now that we have populated the metric, I will hover over the x-axis. There is a 5-minute interval between each dot. The value of 0 or 1 will be displayed on the y-axis. Remember, the y-axis will display a Boolean value 0 if it is not throttling the throughput limit and 1 if it is reaching throughput limit. Now let's work through an example of when a volume has reached its throughput limit and what the metric will look like in the Azure portal. Here is an example of a volume hitting throughput limit and the y-axis displays a 1, and if you see here the volume wasn't reaching the throughput limit in that 5-minute interval and the y-axis displays a 0. I will discuss ways you can configure the throughput limit reached metric for alerting and visibility of operation logs on your Azure NetApp Files volume. The next thing I will talk about is the management of the throughput limit reached metric. At the top right of the metrics main window, I will cover each drop-down menu from left to right. First, by default you will see line chart. If you wish to visualize other chart types you can select the line chart drop-down here and select your chart of choice. Once you select your chart, the metric will automatically populate your chart of choice. Let's move on to the next menu option available. Next, the Drill and Logs drop-down menu provides an overview of the resource, in this case your Azure NetApp Files volume. The second Drill and Logs option is to view the activity logs for your volume, which provides logs on operations that was performed on your volume. Lastly, change analysis must be configured separately and is not within the scope of this demonstration. From the main metric window you can also configure alerts using the new Alert Rule button here. The scope will automatically populate your scope data. So I move on to Conditions tab. Signal name will be the name of the metric. For this demonstration I will select throughput limit reached from the drop-down menu. Threshold will be static by default. You can select dynamic if that setting is warranted. Aggregation type will be average by default and cannot be changed. Next, the operator option will be greater than by default because the throughput limit is a Boolean value 0 or 1. This is an acceptable setting. Unit by default will be count and is acceptable to remain the same. The operator is set to greater than. We can set our threshold value to 0. We know that the throughput limit metric will either be a 0 or 1, so if the threshold value is greater than 0 that means the volume is reaching the throughput limit and the value will be a 1. Lastly, when to evaluate section can remain at its default setting of 5 minutes due to the throughput limit reached metric displaying a new data point every 5 minutes. You can change the when to evaluate intervals if you have specific requirements for alerts. Once you have reviewed your alert settings, you will notice a preview of the metric over here to the right. Now, let's review the Actions tab. Here you can use an action group that you have already created, or you can create a new action group. For more information on actions groups, you can click the Learn More link here. Let's move on to the Details tab. You will see that the subscription and resource group details automatically populate. Next, under the Alert Rule Details section, you can select a severity level per your requirements. By default it is set to Severity 3 Informational. I will move on to entering the alert rule name. Notice that the alert rule description is optional. Lastly, advanced settings are optional and are not required. You can add tags which are optional in the Tags tab here. We can click Review and Create. Once the alert rule creation has completed, it will redirect the page back to the metric home page. I will now cover the last management option, which is the Save to Dashboard drop-down menu. You can select from 3 options: Pin to Dashboard, Pin to Grafana, or Send to Workbook. The last thing I will cover is the ability to adjust the time range of the metric located at the top right of the metric's main window. You can select the time range of a specific window and adjust the metric to use local or UTC time. This concludes the demonstrations of how to use Azure NetApp Files Volume Throughput Limit Reached metric. I hope this video helps you understand the throughput limit reached metric. For more information on Azure NetApp Files Volume Throughput Limit Reached metric, click the link in the description.